I got to tell you, I came so close to getting a date with Dave Kellett the other night. You know what I'm going to talk about?
Yeah, go ahead. Tell the story.
I'm sitting there minding my own business, and all of a sudden,
my own business.
that's right. Just sitting around being pleasant, and all of a sudden, on my phone, I get a text from Dave Kellett saying, "Dinner date tomorrow night?" Oh wait, no, you can't do that. How about Saturday night? And for a minute, I was very tempted not to say anything, just to see where the talk would go. Like, here's what I've got planned. Here's what I'm gonna wear.
See if things get spicy.
Yeah. And so finally, I just wrote back, "Ha." So that you'd see my name, and then it's like, oh shit, wrong text. So Dave, you wrote your work wife instead of your real wife.
Now, I want you to be honest with the world. For a minute, though, you were intrigued, weren't you?
More than intrigued. I was heading for the door. I was looking for my keys.
You're like, could I get a steak out of this?
Yeah, you kidding me? Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So no, I mean, listen. Everybody's done this once or twice, where you've got 2 or 3 text chains going between active, friends, family, all sorts of things, and you absent-mindedly reply to the wrong one. I was talking with Brad at the same time I was texting with my wife, and she was in, where was she? She was in D.C. at the moment. At that moment, was flying home from visiting the White House and stuff, and I was texting Brad, but I hit Brad. And I go, "Hey, Brad, you want to go on a date this week or tomorrow night?" And you know what? We could have been magic, Brad. We could have had something.
I know. We came this close. We came that close.
Well, we'll always have that text chain. and like any date with Dave Kellett, it would have been a reasonably priced meal.
That's right. That's right.
Not splurging on drinks, because that's where they make their money, Brad.
Yeah. I got a feeling we would have been placing our order at the counter.
Brad, I got to tell you, the trick is it's endless breadsticks at Olive Garden. That's the trick. You fill up on the endless breadsticks, and then the marinara is not so expensive. Anyway, on that note, I'm going to say hello, everybody, and welcome to Comic Lab, the show where you can get a date with Dave Kellett if you text him, and making comics.
And making dates and making a living from comics. I'm Brad Geiger, the author of the Webcomics Handbook and the creator of Evil Inc.
And I'm his pal Dave Kellett, cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon and co-director of Stripped.
And this week's Hour of Comics Advice is made possible by your support at patreon.com/comiclab. So Dave, let's talk comics.
Let's talk comics, my friend. And we're going to jump right into it today with a question for people wanting to know about the Patreon API and how to incorporate it into your website, which is something that Brad Geiger has evangelized me into trying, and I love it. And so we're going to talk about it. But here is the question. Brad, what are the ways that Patreon can be used to integrate into a personal comic website? Or maybe a better way to say it would be an indie comic website, an independent comic website. Is there a top 10 list of ways Patreon can bring value to a website? For instance, you've mentioned things like hidden web pages that can be accessed through a sign-in, or not having the comments on the site anymore. What else could possibly be on that list? So Brad Geiger, our local Patreon API expert, who was the first one in my world anyway. I'm sure there were cartoonists or other artists that had figured out how to do it beforehand, but in my world, Brad was the one that was my guiding light into making this happen first for Drive, and in the coming weeks for Sheldon. So Brad, I turn it over to you, my friend. What are the things that folks can do for the Patreon API and their comic website?
Well, first I'm going to tell you, don't make this more complicated than it really is. All right. Because the Patreon plugin, right, the WordPress plugin that allows you to put Patreon content on your site that people can only see once they log in, it only does one thing. All right. So don't make it more complicated than it is. It allows you to put protected Patreon content on your website that people have to sign in to see. That other thing that you mentioned, moving comments off of the website, that has nothing to do with the Patreon plugin. That was just something that Dave did in comparison or in continuation of his idea of incorporating Patreon. In other words, he said, "Listen, I'm not going to go to content comments on my website anymore. I'm going to move those to Patreon." But that didn't have anything to do with the plugin. Okay, it was just part of a bigger strategy that you had. The Patreon plugin allows you to put protected content on your website. So the first thing that you're going to do, or the first thing that I'm going to suggest is if you've got categories of content like I do with Evil Ink After Dark and Courting Disaster and commissions, right? Those are 3 that I've got. I set up subdomains under Evil Ink, and I set those up so that everything that I put into those subdomains, it falls under that Patreon protection, all right, using the Patreon API. So at eiad.evil-ink.com, which is the After Dark section, you go there. It's a whole nother website. And everything that I put up there, I use the Patreon plugin to say people over $10 and over can only see this stuff that I'm posting there. Right, same thing with the commission, same thing with the Courting Disaster. It's all siloed and segregated so that you can get that content there. And of course, it's a little bit better reading experience than you've got on Patreon. It's grouped better, it's cataloged better, and you can control based on how you set that website up. You can control how that looks. So that's the first thing that you're going to do, perhaps, is to have a catalog of different things that you've got. But beyond that, it really depends on what kind of Patreon exclusives you're offering and what kind of outreach you're doing in general. For example, if you didn't want to set a subdomain up, you could post, you know how you post a comic on your website. Once you've got the Patreon plugin installed, you could post the next comic in the series. You can make that a Patreon exclusive if that's how you've got it set up on your Patreon site.
I do.
And then people going to the main website as they're maybe going through the archive or when they get to that one or that day that you posted, you've got to sign in to see that comic. You could actually do that if you want. Okay. I'm not sure that it would work for me, but I'm saying it's an option available. You could make almost any content that you put up there Patreon protected, because as soon as you post it, you'll see off to the side that it's got that option for you. So I could also see this if you used it creatively to do, like, sometimes you'll see people say, well, here's an additional panel to this comic that only my Patreon backers could see. I could see you implementing that sort of thing. Right. And then the list goes on and on from there. I would also suggest any kind of extras that you would want for your Patreon backers, you also put it on your Patreon website. For example, if you got a map that your story is taking place in, that you've done, that you want to make a Patreon exclusive, that can be used there. And that would, you can put that on your website wherever you want. And point to it in direct traffic. You can do discounts with that. You could have, although like an about page or a backstory synopsis is good to have publicly facing, you could do a deeper dive into that and put that on your website as protected content. The real question isn't how do I use this? Because how you use it is very simple. You put Patreon protected content on your website. How you interpret that for your particular webcomic is up to you. And you should let your creativity go wild on that and do some experimenting and see what your audience is responding to.
Yeah, and I will echo Brad's excellent advice just by saying Brad and I walk, in many respects, very similar paths in our business models. And yet, because of the nature of our stories and the nature of who we are as artists, the way we have incorporated the API is noticeably different between Evil Ink and Drive. Yeah. And so, much like Brad, the basic idea stays the same. When you log in on Drive with the API, you're unlocking pages that are hidden to the public, right? That same basic concept is true for Brad, it's true for me. But like Brad was saying, I have things like I have, as Brad does with his sort of Patreon exclusives, I have 200 pages of Tales of the Drive, which are sort of guest artists that I've hired to do things in the Drive universe. When they first run, they're public and everybody can enjoy them. But then after that, they go behind sort of the paywall and they become exclusive. And now there's 200 pages of that, right? Yeah. And so I also do stuff, as Brad mentioned, maps and found objects and ship blueprints that don't appear anywhere else on the site. But if you really want to drill down deep, they're really fun for people that love the story to click around the map. There's even some animated maps that show the changing nature of the war, and you can see the empires move and shift and all that sort of stuff. So that's fun. And then, like Brad said, I also have it where when you're logged into Drive, normally if you're just a normal person reading Drive and you get to today's strip, you'll see a thing that says you can read early, but it's Patreon only, and that has the next page or next 2 pages. When you log in, suddenly those pages are available.
Right.
Unlike Brad, I don't have a subdomain, but I have found ways with Brian of Tucheki to sort of wall off certain sections of my site, right? And then the other thing that I will recommend is that with the upcoming Sheldon site, which knock on wood is coming out in the next couple of weeks, or God forbid the next couple of months, one of the things that I've done is, because there's 5,000 Sheldons, right? That's a lot of comics over the years. And so it's kind of daunting for someone to tackle all 5,000. So what I've done is I've made themed collections, which have worked very well for me as books. So I figured, why not try this as Patreon walled off API stuff?
Yeah.
So I've got, and these are just some sample selections so you can see what I've done. The first selection or collection is called Dave's Faves. It's all my personal favorites, which I think the true fans of the strips will like to see. Hey, what are the ones that he really loves, you know? And then, of course, I've got Pugs, all separated out. All the coffee comics separated out. Pickles, which is a bird character, a ne'er-do-well bird character of mine that people love. All the pop culture strips, so Star Trek, Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, all that stuff gets separated out. All the literature stuff, because I was a literature major in school and grad school, all those get separated out. And then all the anatomy ones, Anatomy of Dinosaurs, Anatomy of Authors, Anatomy of Animals. If you just want to read those are separated out as well. So, it's another way of, as Brad said, that just have it where when you log in, there's exclusive stuff, and it's up to you how you're going to organize it, how your creativity and the nature of your comic is going to tell you how to do it. But as Brad said, the intrinsic thing is it's up to you.
Yeah, and there's so many ways you could do this. And again, I really encourage you to do the work to connect that Patreon plugin to your website, and then just start experimenting. Because here's, just as you're talking, I'm thinking, oh, you know what else I could do with that that I'm not doing yet? The standard, typical webcomic layout, right? And by the way, it's not the best for everyone, but there's a lot of ways to interpret it. But you always got either the comic or a landing page comic there. And what do you have underneath? 9 chances out of 10 that we've been doing since time immemorial. You've got a blog post, right? We did that back in the day for SEO. And we've you see people stepping away a little bit from the blog post on the webcomic site, but it's not gone completely. But what I'm saying is you've got that option there to not only do today's comic, but a post for today's blog, right?
Right.
Now, if you incorporate that blog into your web page, how can you use that? Let's say the comic that you post is publicly available, but you've got that blog post area that you could do anything in, right? Anything that you can code in there that's very simple. You could put that. What if that's Patreon content? What if you point to that and you use that to promote that you're doing even more stuff? How can you use that? The sky's the limit.
Yep. I will say, too, and this might be helpful to somebody that's considering it like I was. I had a really strong interest, speaking of blog comments, of making it so that you couldn't comment on the Drive website unless you were logged into Patreon. Right. And then it would take your login and sort of mirror the the comments from the Patreon site over on the website. And to his great credit, Brian of Tucheki looked and did a lot of exploration, did a lot of checking with the API. And it turns out you could not mirror or carry over or, use the comment system on Patreon in the API. So that's just one thing I just want to warn you of. You can, to Brad's point, you can absolutely experiment with blogging and stuff like that, but it has to be native to your site that the Patreon API unlocks, if that makes sense.
Right.
So you can't have a marriage between or communication between what you're putting on Patreon and what goes on the site. You have to still do them independently. But I will say this, another thing that I did, or I'm going to do with Sheldon that I've never done before, and this again is part of Brad's advice, which is, in recent years, my Sheldon books have been selling well, I don't know. Maybe when in some respects are selling as well as they ever did, but in other respects they're not selling as well as I would like. And so I've been diminishing the amount of Sheldon books that I've been doing. 15 was fine, and that might just be it. Is it? I saturated the market for them. But what I'm doing with the Patreon API now is I'm calendar locking huge chunks of the Sheldon archives so that the world will get 2 years of Sheldon for free. But the other, well, I don't even know how many years that it leaves. I'm terrible at math, but frankly, thousands and thousands and thousands of Sheldon comics will now be unlocked only with Patreon.
Yes.
And I feel like that's a good value for the $2 a month or $3 a month or $5 a month. You're going to have access to the entire archive. In a way, it was costing me money to host that many comics for free for the world, for everyone. Yeah. And so I'm taking Brad's advice, and at this point, I'm feeling pretty good about it.
It took you a long time to come around on that, right?
Yeah.
Because it ran counter to how you and I did business since 2000, right? Where you give it all up for free.
And counter to how we self-identified, too, is like, this will be free to read forever, that kind of thing.
That's the problem, because I've said this before. We got caught up in our own press, right?
Yes.
We got caught up in our own marketing, because you and I know both that it was never free. It was ad supported.
Oh, yeah. It was costing us. Yeah.
Right. But we said it was free. We said it was free in posts. We said it was free in comic conventions. We said free for 20 years until we even started to believe it. But the truth was, it was never free. It was ad supported. Right. And so once you parsed that and said, wait a minute, it used to be worth my time to have a huge archive that's publicly available because you got that ad money. Once you looked at it realistically and said, I'm actually paying people to read this stuff. Right. And then you put that behind a Patreon paywall and you make that part of the value of becoming a Patreon supporter. Now you're getting paid again. And unfortunately, the name of this job is getting paid.
Well, I will say this, until Brad convinced me of it, I was probably, if I'm being honest about it, losing money on the pure website operation back when I was hosted on a website that rhymes with Amazon. In that I was hosting a hell of a lot of images, 5,000 images, and the traffic and just the overall. I mean, DreamHost is going to be so much better than I ever was on Amazon. But what I'm getting at here is that Brad was like, look, it is costing you money to serve up these free images, these 5,000 free images for anybody that wants them in the world, Yeah. And if you're not going to do books, you've got to extract value out of it by calendar locking them. And I think it's the right move. I really do. 2 years is a lot of comics for someone to fall in love with Sheldon if they're new.
Plenty.
To then say, you know what? Yes, I would like to support, because I'll also get the themed collections. I'll also get the commentary in the community. I'll also, calendar unlock 4,000 more comics. I think there is enough value there for someone to say, yes, I want to do this. I want to back Sheldon.
Yeah. And not only that, but again, going back to that value add, and you can do this on Patreon and on your website, is now that you calendar lock a bunch of that stuff and put that into the archive now, and you've got those themed collections, you can continue that themed collection idea ad nauseum, right? You could you could do it like on this date in history. Here's what was running on Sheldon in 2005, right? You can do all kinds of other ways of collecting that, because what I find on Patreon is, and as much as I love them, they're not good at cataloging this stuff. And so we've got to do that. The good news is the more that you do that, the more you're able to post for your Patreon backers. And I'm convinced that's a good thing. Your Patreon backers want to feel like they're getting something for their money. Right. Yeah, and so you're doing that. And now you come back and say, hey, in fact, I did it just this week. I did a single panel comic that featured The Thing from the Fantastic Four. Right. And I thought, I don't know whether I posted, I said, I often do these kind of things, but I don't know how much that I'm doing it. So here's not only today's comic, but 7 other times that I featured Marvel and DC characters in single panel cartoons. Do you know what my audience loved about it? Yeah. Half of them had never seen those cartoons.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
And they had access to them, Listen to this next sentence that's going to come out of my mouth. They had access to them, but they never got the value from them until I packaged it up and served it to them. Now, again, it runs counter to everything a cartoonist thinks, because any dyed-in-the-wool cartoonist says, I just served up leftovers, but they weren't. It was morsels that my audience did not have until I repackaged it and sent it back to them. And those people got more value for their Patreon membership that day than they had before. It's going to make it a lot harder for them to leave tomorrow. Right. So much of what you're going to do on your website and on patreon.com itself is about repackaging your stuff.
Yeah, and that's why I think for me and for my hard and fast fans, the themed collections that I'm putting together, I really think those packagings will be of tremendous value, because frankly, me as a cartoonist, let's say next week, Brad, I don't know what the punchline is, but I know I want to do a comic about pugs. If I can go to a segmented chunk of my website and just read through 100 of my comics, I know that I'll get an idea too, by the way, just reading through. So I see value even in that for me. But anyway, I want everybody to know, too, that this is not the end game for Brad and I. No. We're constantly talking with each other and checking out sites that are using the API and sort of making a mental note of like, well, they're doing a swords and sorcery comic, so I couldn't do it exactly what they're doing. But the core idea of how they're using the API, I could apply. So, and we'll continue to talk about this on the show. But I think you get the idea. And Brad laid it out perfectly, which is you're implementing the API. And in my case, by the way, I had to hire someone because it's just not my core competency to do that. So I hired Brian to do it for me. But anyway, you're implementing the API to unlock essentially secret sections out of your website that create value both for the people that do it and perceived value for the people who have yet to do it. Yeah. And that's the core idea.
Yeah. And if you're doing a story comic, unleash on it. There's we gave you lots of ideas already. Yep. But if you're doing a story comic, great. If you're doing gag comics, single shots there, we gave you a bunch of ideas from that. And then what Dave said that I wanted to underline is go out into the world and look how story comics, if you're a gag comic person, right, go and look at how the story comics people are doing it. And better yet, look at how the romance writers are doing it and how the video people are doing it, the YouTubers and the VTubers. Go out there and pay attention. And don't just say, well, I'm a gag cartoonist, so I can only look at gag. No, that's not how any of this works. Go out there and see what everybody is doing. And then say, okay, it seems to be working, or it appeals to me, or I like that. Now, how can I make that apply to me? That's where you're going to get the good stuff. Not just by trying to follow what somebody who's doing exactly what you're doing, and then copying that, but by going out and spending some time and just spend a little bit of time with this and say, oh, yeah, I like how that person is doing it. And they're doing something complete. They're collecting quartz. They're gemstone collectors. It's the furthest thing in the world from what I'm doing. But I can see that at the heart of it is this mechanic that I really like.
Yeah. And as Brad always says, you're asking the why behind the what. You're asking why they're doing it the way they're doing it. And in so doing, you'll be able to apply someone whose business is hugely divergent from your own, like a quartz collector or someone, an appreciator of Victorian wool. And you'll say, yeah, but why are they using the API that way? Oh, I see. Now, how can I apply that to my story about superheroes, or my story about sci-fi, or my story about swords and sorcery? And you'll see that the why behind the what will get to you to where you want to go. Hey, if you're listening while you work, take a minute to stand and stretch.
And while you're doing that, we're going to tell you why you should join us on Patreon.
When you do, you're going to get hours and hours of podcasts that we've recorded just for backers.
And exclusive Patreon posts that go even deeper on Comic Lab topics.
And access to our exclusive Discord server, which is a thriving community of professional cartoonists.
So you can support the show you love and get tons of actionable resources for your own cartooning.
And listen, if you can't swing a pledge this month, we get it. No worries.
Yeah, listen, you can still support the show by rating us wherever you get your podcasts.
Just leave a 5-star review and a few kind words.
That, along with mentions on social media, is incredibly helpful.
Now, everybody, let's talk comics.
Dave, you mentioned DreamHost at the top of the show, and it makes me so happy that they are a sponsor of this show, because you and I can both now talk about, from firsthand experience, what a great service is available over at dreamhost.com/Comic Lab.
Absolutely. You know what? It's funny because even before they were sponsoring the show, Brad has been telling me as a friend, as we both do with varying things in our business, like, look, you've got to do X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
And Brad knew I was hosting and paying too much on a certain website, which won't go mention. And I don't know if I shared the number with him or not, but I gave him a ballpark, and he's like, "Hi, yeah."
You did share it, and my eyes rolled around in my head. It was some of those Rankin Bass characters when they find out something surprising happened. I looked like that.
Well, and even more frustratingly, my previous host had such a confusing back end that it made my life miserable at least once every 6 months when they would change some arcane technical thing. And then I had to read through their technical notes, jump through a bunch of hoops, and fix some weird S3 bucket thing on my host because they updated or changed some technical specs on their end. Anyway, one of the things that I've loved so far in jumping over to DreamHost, and this is the honest to God truth, is when I filed a support ticket the other day, they had a level, Brad, that you can select. Like, are you a tech pro? Are you a pro-am? Or would you like to talk to us like, hey, you might not know all the details. And guess which selection I chose, Brad? I chose the talk to me like I'm a 5-year-old that wandered into a nuclear power plant. But though, we joke about it, but honestly, I appreciated it because some of the stuff I did know. But God, why not have some hand holding? Because it's not my day-to-day life to be talking about servers and hosting and all the sort of technical details of it. So I appreciated that in a future moment of crisis, and those will come up on any hosting, probably of my creation, that when I reach out to support, I can say, hey, listen, I'm not the most tech savvy person when it comes to server administration, so maybe give me a little bit more of a helping hand. And by the way, the first ticket that I filed for a mistake that I caused, by the way, I want to be super clear about this, with DreamHost, they were incredibly kind, really jumped in on the problem, explained what I had done wrong, explained how I could fix it, and then actually fixed it for me because they're like, you know what, it's just easier if I do that for you. Why don't we do that right now? Do I have your permission? I said, absolutely, yes. And they fixed it for me. It was great. I could not be happier so far with how things are going on DreamHost.
The great thing about filing a support ticket with DreamHost is you get a person who is real, and you get a person who is real nice.
Yeah.
That's what I always love about it. I know that they're real, and I know they're going to be real nice. And as I know, I'm looking at the show notes, we're going to talk about this a little bit in the next segment in the update, but it's so important now more than ever to own and control your own work. And big part of that, we've been talking about it for 5 years, we'll be talking about it for 5 more, is on your own website. And DreamHost can get you started. They've got over at dreamhost.com/Comic Lab, they've got some real simple plans to get you started, like a couple of bucks a month just to get started. You don't have to it doesn't have to be grand right off the bat. Just learn, get your feet wet and get your sea legs, and then you can go with this stuff, and DreamHost is going to grow right along with you.
Right. So with our hearty endorsement from both Brad and I, head on over to dreamhost.com/Comic Lab.
Absolutely. Now, Dave, you've got an update, and actually it's been all that either one of us could think about all week. We're recording this show right in the middle of June, and there's been a hashtag that's been going around where people have been talking about how the comics industry, quote unquote, has broke them. It was hashtag comics broke me. And we can't really speak to the pain that's behind all of that, but we do have some thoughts about some macro level issues.
Yeah, and before we jump into, we should just note that the hashtag grew out of a very specific and very personal pain, which is not my or Brad's place to speak to, but just know that it was we're honoring that this comes from a very specific point of pain. Yeah. But The hashtag itself, Comics Broke Me, sort of metastasized into a bigger discussion online of how the industry, again and again, in very different careers, in very different publishers and outlets, screwed people in ways that were painful to read. And again, Brad and I would read this hashtag and not out of frustration, but out of friendship in wanting to say that there is a better path. Like, I specifically want to speak to young 20-somethings, of which a lot of these hashtags were coming from, because publishers, especially small to middling sized comic book publishers, have preyed on consistently for decades, have preyed on the enthusiasm and the excitement of younger cartoonists who are just champing to get into the business, right? And are willing to take $5 and a nickel for a page rate to do backbreaking work for hundreds of pages. And they chew them up and they spit them out. And so specifically, our update for today is because Brad and I are trying to, in our own small way, pay forward what we know. Because if we can save you an hour worth of trouble, we can save you a year's worth of trouble by saying, listen, don't go down this path, go down this path. We tried this, or this has been done, it did not work, go this way. With all good faith, we're trying as friends to pass along what we and what people of our generation have learned. And I sometimes worry that we're not reaching the young 20-something cartoonists, all of whom think that Webtoons is the only place they can build a career, because a version of that is what they grew up with, that or Tapas or something else is what they grew up with on their iPads. And now that they're out of college, they think that's where they need to go. And so I think both Brad and I, as this week's update, just want to say, if you know somebody that's in their early 20s or mid 20s or hell, even later, who thinks that they have to go with a small to mid-sized comic publisher to make a career, or they have to go to Webtoons to make a career, or Tapas or whatever, please just pass along the show to them, because reading this hashtag broke my heart, because all these people again and again, it was the same story of like, well, there's no other way to make a living at it. And I personally wanted to shake them by the shoulders and say, own and control your own business. There is a different way. You don't have to go with publishers, especially predatory publishers. You don't have to go with Webtoons, especially with some of the clauses they have in their contract. You can own and control your own business.
Yeah. So I sometimes I think, well, maybe we're just not reaching these people because they see a couple old guys and they're like, well, what do these geezers know? Sit down before you fall down. But here's what we're asking, since you're listening to the show: vouch for us, right? Vouch for us on behalf of these other people who need to hear, because everything that I read in the Comics Broke Me hashtag was like, we've been talking about this for 5 years, every week for 5 years. We're coming up on our 300th show. Every week for 5 years, we've been talking about this. Help us out. Help us get across these folks, because God knows they've got to listen to us. And they're all the same as we were at that age. They don't think they can run a business. They don't think that they can do social media. They don't think they can do any of it. They think that all they're capable of is writing and drawing. All right. And the truth is, as I've said before, if you can do that, your brain is operating at top level. Creativity is the top level of brain power. If you can do that, you can pay your estimated taxes. If you can do that, you can do effective social media. But help us out. Help us get across these folks, because oh, man, I do not want to read another Twitter thread like this ever again. It's been all that I could think about for the last week.
Well, and I know I sound like an old cynical guy, but as much as I would love the idea for the people that work in the big two or any form of publishing, a cartoonist union is never going to happen. It's talked about every decade, and every decade it doesn't happen, because it's like herding cats in an industry for which 1,000 people are willing to take a lesser page rate to take your place. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I wish it would happen. It's not going to happen. I'm saying that cynically. I understand that I'm saying that cynically. The optimist in me would love for a union to happen. It's not going to happen.
Right.
But also, the path of owning and controlling your own business gives you the continual power to make your own magic and to generate your own business at a pace that is manageable in a style that brings you joy, in a voice and a tone and a writing outlet that is true to your heart and will stir passion not only in you but in a readership that finds your unique voice amazing in a world of corporately written stuff and licensed properties that all tell the same story, right?
Yes.
So it's not only possible, it's joy filled when you own and control your own business. And honestly, it's a better life in comics.
Yeah, and I'm just before we get the people trying to do the pedant correction bit. We know it would be a guild and not a union. We get that. We get that. Yeah. It would be, since we're all contracted employees, it would be a guild that would be organizing. But along those same lines, I actually had a lot of thoughts on that because there is an organization already. That's already here. If you wanted to pursue this, you wouldn't have to build it from the ground up. All right, the Graphic Artists Guild already exists. All right, and they're already they've been around for a long time. They're the ones behind that book. That's the pricing guide, ethical guidelines and pricing guide. You can get health insurance through the Graphic Artists Guild. Right. They have a lot of networking, a lot of information share. They're actually, I was a member for a little while. They're doing. Yeah.
Let me ask you, what were the dues of the Graphic Artists Guild?
Oh, golly, I think it was 100 somewhere. I don't want to say because I you know how I am with numbers. Yeah. It was between $100 and $200. It wasn't expensive. But the thing that I'm trying to say is that the Graphic Artist Guild is kind of the perfect construct that's already here. We wouldn't have to build it from the ground up. All we'd have to do, if you wanted to get involved in this and put some energy behind this idea, it seems to me like the obvious choice is not to create it from the ground up, but to get involved in the Graphic Artists Guild, and who already has a bunch of cartoonists and comics artists who are members, and to use that as an existing structure to get even bigger. It's already there. The thing is, I don't think that they like, if it kind of disappointed me that they weren't right on top of that hashtag saying, hey, we're here, come on over and join us. They should have been on top of that, right? But it's one of those things that it could be a very usable solution for us. For those of you who say, oh, we should have a guild.
Yeah, and listen, if you've listened to the show long enough, you know that I'm kind of an eternal optimist. But on this topic, I will be the cynic and the pessimist and say, in my 25 years of doing cartooning, every year I hear some voice chime in and go, we need to start a union. And then another voice over here, yeah, we do. Yeah, he's right. Yeah, she's making a good point. Yeah, we should. And then crickets, because it is unfortunately the nature of the beast that we are all independently minded, flying solo, living in our own quiet studios. And it's rare that there is the cartoonist organizer, you know what I mean, that wants to take this on. Because frankly, if you're a cartoonist organizer, you're probably self-organizing your own business and owning and controlling it. And you don't want to be in a union anyway because you've got your own thing going on. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I say this as an eternal optimist. This is an issue that I tend to be cynical about. I don't think in my lifetime I will ever see a functioning cartooning guild or a functioning cartoonist union. Yeah. Just because 25 years have proved the point that every year someone chimes in going, we got to start a union. Yeah, it's a great point. We should. Yeah, all right. I love it. Nobody does anything about it, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. I although it's, I'm actually a little bit on the other side of you, and usually
I can tell you are. That's good. I want it to be true, Brad. I'm not saying that I don't want a union or a guild. I just, I mean, prove me wrong is what I'm saying. Go out and start a union. I know you won't do it, is the truth. Is the honest to God truth. Not you, Brad, but not even you, the listener. I'm just saying anyone. No one will do it. I know there's a movement in the Pacific Northwest to start one, and bless them if they can get it going. I don't think it will happen.
Right. And just because you brought it up, I while you were talking, I did a quick search. The membership dues are $200 a year for the Graphic Artists Guild. And for what it was worth, I found it very, very useful. But
let me ask you this: why did you stop?
Because
because as a person who owns and controls his own business, you didn't need it, did you?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I didn't need it for health insurance. I don't need it because I own and control my own work. The other things it was offering were not that pursuant to my interests.
Yeah.
And so it was $200 check that I didn't have to write.
Hey, I'll tell you, this is the rare cynic in me. Every cartoonist that has the self-organization to own and control their own business, Jeff Smith's not out forming a union. The guys that created the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles aren't out forming a union because they own and control their own stuff and they're working on their business. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I know this makes me sound like a cynic, and that's rare on this show because I'm ever the optimist, but I don't think it will ever happen because any cartoonist that has the wherewithal to get their own business going focuses on that and then doesn't need a union.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. But needless to say, I'm going to transition us into our next topic. But
sorry, because I know that's the rare me poo-pooing the world.
It's so weird. Usually it's me kind of doing the cynic bit, but it is nice to see that you've got that side of you. I can't. I can't wait to see how that comes out on our next dinner date.
This is going to make our date so awkward, Brad.
Yes. So let's with the reminder, please help us if you can to get us across to some of those younger people who don't want to listen to geezers but might need to. Let's go and take an art topic. This is something that'll be a nice palate cleanser after all that business. This comes in from a $5 Patreon backer who says, I'm relatively new to comics, but I've started putting in time to get good at this craft. I've been messing around with different brushes and ways to draw my characters, and I feel like my art style is diverging. What I mean by that is I'm coming up with multiple styles to draw one of my comic ideas, and I'm unsure of which to choose. These styles have a different tone or feel to them, and I get a lot of decision anxiety. I assume that over time, I'll settle on one or two styles and that's convenient for me to draw. Is this the right line of thinking? Any advice on what I'm going through? Thanks again for the growing archive of comic knowledge. So let's talk about somebody who's just starting out and sees their art style going in a whole bunch of different directions at once.
I love the word, just as a sidetrack, I love the word diverging because I always think of that book Divergent, which I always thought was such a terrible title because it was like, what was it? It was like Divergent, Detergent. There was like 3 books in a row that all ended with that. You know, it was like those teen dystopian future novels. Anyway, that's going nowhere, but I just never liked the title Divergent. Anyway, so my answer to this is that because I've experienced this multiple times, and I think Brad has as well, where you're starting to explore different styles and liking it. And they both seem valid and both paths seem like interesting ways to go down. My thought on this is that you are in the process of leveling up right now. Mm-hmm. You are getting more and more confident as an artist, and your hand is saying, yeah, I can do A, but I can also do B. And look, they're both pretty good. And then soon you'll be able to do C and D and E and F, and you'll do all these different styles.
Yeah.
And then eventually you'll be Lar D'Souza, and you can do any style you want.
You can do anything.
You can draw anything. No, but there is, first of all, there's a joy in stepping outside what is your normal line art. So let's just acknowledge that. It's fun to be able to try a new style. Like, let's just throw stuff out. Like you're drawing UPA animation style from the 50s, or you're drawing Garfield style, or you're doing more, editorial cartoon style, whatever it might be, New Yorker style, whatever it might be. It is training your hand and giving yourself more skill set and more tool sets to use in the future that you're able to do this second set. I think what will happen as you play around with both, and I'm sorry to hear that they're causing you decision anxiety as to which route to go. That's unfortunate because it should be kind of joy-filled. Yeah. But if this is happening to you for the first time, I can see how that would make maybe I'm just not remembering that the first time this happened to me, it made me anxious. Mm-hmm. But you know what? Now that I think about it, I do remember in college, I figured out a new way to draw eyes that I liked a lot. And then I actually do remember now feeling very anxious about like, well, I can't just change my character's eyes. That's
right.
That feels different. And then eventually you sort of, you do what Foxtrot did in like year 2 or 3 and you just go, nope, new style. Now this is what everybody looks like. And isn't it better? And everybody goes, within a course of 6 months, everybody goes, yeah, this is better. I like this better. And so, Brad, let me ask you, how would you answer this one? Because I feel like I have a less than satisfying answer.
Yeah, no, I think you hit it on the mark, actually. And I'm just going to come around and regroup it a little bit, because here's the deal. What you're going through is normal. I remember hearing a story about a young person that all of a sudden woke up in their teen years and saw some hairs growing out of their lip, and they were apoplectic. Oh, my God. What's happening to me, right? And they just didn't understand that, hey, when you get to be a teenager, you get a little hair on your lip, right? And so once they understood that, it was like, oh, okay, I get it. And then next thing you know, they were preening in the mirror, these little hairs that were coming in. And this is the same thing. You got some hair coming in on your lip, perhaps. All right. And
suddenly this became the most awkward dad talk. Now you're going to start noticing some changes to your body, and your voice is going to.
Yep. And you're going to get these feelings. And no, here's the deal. This is normal. Everything you're going through is perfectly normal. And your job is to keep going and to say, hey, I drew this one thing and this worked out really well. And then you're going to draw something else, and that style isn't going to work so well for it, right? But that experience is important because it gets you to the next place. The worst thing you can do is to try and shoot for 100% success rate at your point. You should be shooting for maybe 50% with the understanding that those quote unquote failures, the times that you look at it and you're like, nah, that just wasn't right. That's valuable, because that's going to take you to learning how to draw something like that the next time. I very much prefer to look at style, especially art style, in the rear view mirror. I very much don't try to go towards something so much as I try to have those experiences, live and learn from them, and let that inform my next drawing decision, and then check out what I've got going on in the rear view mirror after I've drawn them. I've been drawn for 30 years at the professional level, if you include my newspaper experience. I draw in pretty much 1 or 2 styles. I've got maybe 2 styles I can draw from.
I would say 3. I think you have 3 styles, but keep going. Yeah.
Yeah, one of them, I've got my evil ink style, and I've got a very loose a single panel cartoon style, and I've got one that kind of floats between the two a little bit.
That's what I was going to say. You have a floater between the two. Brad, you got a floater.
But I don't concern myself with that quite so much as what's the next thing I'm going to draw and how am I going to solve that problem, and knowing full well that maybe I don't solve it. So even today, not a couple of weeks ago, I did a single panel, and I'm telling you, it just did not hang together that well, and it was disappointing, but the next time I come into that situation, I'm going to be that much better, because I'm going to know that I've got to approach this from a little bit different angle, right? So I think the worst thing you can do is worry about what you're looking like and whether this is working and that's working and I should be drawing this and I should be drawing that. I think you should be drawing as much as possible and enjoying it. And then looking at it and saying, that one worked, that one didn't. That's great. 50-50. That's the success was a success and the failure was a success, because it's going to come back to me dressed up like a success tomorrow.
So I think I hear what you're saying, which is that when you look at a comic from last week or yesterday in the rearview mirror, the execution of the style could be perfect. It could be absolutely, you nailed exactly what you set out to do. But looking back on it, sometimes you're like, the execution was perfect, but the style that I chose was all wrong.
Yeah.
Like, it would have been better had I done this. Mm-hmm. And from that, you learn what to apply for tomorrow's or for next week's. Is that what I hear you saying?
Yeah. It could be that the execution stunk too, but really what we're talking about, it could be, hey, you just you drew that guy's arm way too big, or, your anatomy was off, or the perspective was off. It could be those things too. But when we're talking about style, it could be, the execution was fine. It's just that style didn't hang together so well. That's okay. Yeah, next time, try something different.
Because that's why I felt like my answer was and is unsatisfying, because this cartoonist is coming to us and saying, hey, I have two styles that are really both gelling in a way that's satisfying.
Yeah.
So for tomorrow's page or tomorrow's comic, hey, Brad and Dave, which one do I go with? And I feel like I don't have a satisfying answer to that, but maybe you're saying experiment, and there's going to be some failures, but only in drawing them, only in looking back at them in the rearview mirror will you say, all right, well, I tried drawing in style A for this. Style B would have been better. And personally, what I think will happen over time is, yes, you'll have both styles, like Brad was talking about with his single panel and his long form stuff. But what will also happen is the two styles will also inform each other, and a little bit they'll leak into each other in a very satisfying way, which is what I have found. I have done over the course of 5,000 Sheldons, and Brad remembers these, I've done ones where I tried a 1930s animation style in Sheldon for a while, or I did, I don't know, a 1980s comic strip style in Sheldon for a while, or I did all gray ink washes rather than color the comics, and then I would photograph instead of scan those in, right? So I tried a bunch of stuff, and what's great is, like, I try it and you go, oh, that's neat, it worked. It doesn't need to be my permanently going forward style, but it was fun. I'm glad I tried it. But what's funny is there will be a joke or a storyline or an arc 2 years from now that actually would benefit from a gray wash, or would benefit from a character who looks like a 1930s comic strip character or a 1980s. And so it leaks back in, is what I'm trying to say. And that's very satisfying, that your experimentation from the past eventually gets melded into your stuff that you're doing. Whether it's Brad might have a walk-on character in his long form stuff that a little bit looks like one of the characters in his short form stuff, because for the joke of that day or for that walk-on purposes, it works really well to have that style.
Yeah. In fact, I'll take that one step further. The crucial part of this question is this person is just starting out. Okay. Yeah. So for somebody who's just starting out, I think the worst thing in the world you could do is look at that drawing and say, this is my style, right? The worst thing you can do as somebody starting out is to say, I've got an art style, right? You've just been doing this for a while. You don't have a style yet. You have a whole lot of drawing ahead of you before you've got a style, right? And if you do say, well, I'm drawing it this way and this is my style, I think you're preventing yourself from the future learning that you need to do. So I would discourage you from even thinking about style right now. I think you should just be drawing. And drawing. We can talk about style a year or so from now after you've done a whole bunch of drawing. I don't want you to get wound up with style. I want you to get wound up with, did this final piece satisfy me artistically? That's all I wanted. I don't care about style. I don't care if it looked like yesterday's piece. I don't care if it's going to look like tomorrow's piece. I just want to know, is it a good piece? We'll talk style later on.
That's actually a very satisfying answer to that. Yes.
Dave, talking about style, it's usually our style to end this show after about 60 minutes of talk, and we've been running our teeth all this time. It's time for us to style it right out of here. And with that, I'm going to say that you've been listening to Comic Lab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
Your hosts have been my attractive date for this Friday night, Brad Geiger, the editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Link at evilcomic.com.
And my good friend Dave Kellett, the co-director of the comics documentary Stripped and the cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com and Drive at drivecomic.com.
And to answer your questions at home, no, I will not be paying for wine. I'm going to bring my own and pay the corkage fee. It's a little bit cheaper, and I like to save those dollars. The Comic Lab theme song is used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net, and this episode was edited by Matt Woodard of Woodsong Productions over at www.woodsong.media.
And for those of you who are wondering, the answer is not on the first date. If you love Comic Lab, you can rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, and you may hear your review featured on a future episode. And don't forget to give us a 5-star review on Spotify, where this show is tearing up the podcast charts.
And for those of you wondering at home, that's why I'm paying the corkage fee. The Comic Lab is made possible by your support at patreon.com/Comic Lab. So we'll go ahead and say that twice. Patreon.com/
cork fee, Dave. I've been to your house. All those wine bottles had caps.
Brad, it's perfectly valid if the wine is spelled RIPPLE. That's a perfectly valid way to spell wine.
It's the first time I've ever seen a vintage from Welch's.